We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us today for the Meet the Farm Hands video segment. I'm your host, Hannah Pagel, and today we are speaking with Renee Munasifi of Nutrien. Renee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Hannah.
So to kick off this interview, let's just go back to the very beginning. Take me back to your North Dakota roots and how you made your way out to DC.
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Midwest, so lived in Minnesota, went to school at NDSU, and then lived in South Dakota for a while. And really, my plan was to come to DC and join the Foreign Service. And so I had to get here first. When I arrived, I had my suitcase and a little yellow sticky note that had the address of a friend from college that let me crash on the couch for a couple days. So once I got here, I interned for Senator Thune's office from South Dakota. And I got into ag policy from working on the 2008 Farm Bill with his senior policy advisor, Lynn Churchma. And at the time, we were working on drought maps. There's lots of issues like that in South Dakota, and really just loved the policy, but also just really loved the people, loved working with people in the agriculture field and working with farmers. Mm-hmm. So 15 years later, still doing it.
That's awesome. And I kind of want to go back to your college career because I think you have something that's very unique in that you speak another language too. So you went to school and you have a degree in Spanish, but you also speak a little bit of Arabic. What made you want to pursue that?
In college, I studied Spanish, as you mentioned, and then we also had to take another language on top of that to major in Spanish. And so I chose Arabic. Very difficult language. I still haven't quite grasped it, but studied abroad a little bit in Egypt and really enjoyed my time there, and my Arabic was much better then.
Okay. And do those skills transfer over to your career today at all?
I think I definitely still use Spanish from time to time. I did work at the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture for a number of years, and that is kind of like the FAO of Latin America. And there I spoke Spanish daily, working with my Latin American counterparts, and really enjoyed doing that. But being able to speak to a whole another segment of the world, I think, has been really enlightening and really fulfilling. Mm-hmm.
So when you were on the Hill, you then went over to USDA and then to USDR, which is pretty unique in this town, considering like those are three main institutions of the agriculture industry. I am curious, what made you want to get experience across all three versus just investing in one establishment?
So when I went over to USDA, Ed Schaefer was the secretary at the time. He was from North Dakota. So there was a position open over there in the congressional office. And so having come from interning on the Senate kind of seemed like a great fit. And then just really enjoyed, that was at the end of the Bush administration. And it was a really just great opportunity for me as just starting out my career to be able to jump into some of those roles, as a lot of people were leaving toward the end of the administration. So it really helped get some early kind of exposure and experience and responsibilities in areas that they probably wouldn't have given me otherwise.
So then from USDA, you went on to ICA. Tell us a little bit more about the experience that you had there, and for our viewers, like maybe explain a little bit what ICA does.
So ICA is the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. They're kind of an extension service in Latin America. It's similar to the Food and Agriculture Organization in Europe, but this is Latin American based. And so I really enjoyed that experience because it was a merging of kind of the agriculture policy background and my love of foreign policy as well. So I really got to work with some of my Latin American counterparts, some of the embassies down there, and speak Spanish on a daily basis, which was a lot of fun to be able to use that Spanish speaking experience.
Did you get to travel down there?
I did. I went to Costa Rica for a young leaders conference that they had, and that was kind of a neat experience to see a lot of agriculture leaders from all over Latin America.
So from there, then you went to the American Soybean Association, and then to your current position today at Nutrien. What made you want to make those two switches, and what sold you on coming to Nutrien?
Well, joining Nutrien, so I've been here about 3 years. Honestly, having worked at American Soybean Association, working in the ag policy world, really wanting to find a business that was committed to the farmers. And so I think Nutrien has been just a really great experience in that we have the fertilizer production capacity, but then we also have the retail branch with that connection to the farmer customer. And I think that's really what I like, and being able to still keep that kind of farmer-centric policy experience.
Mm-hmm. And for our viewers, kind of explain a little bit more about what like a day-to-day looks like for you here. Do you get to have those conversations with farmers daily? Like how does that look?
Sure. Well, actually, I just came from the National Association of Wheat Growers board meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that's really just a lot of fun to be able to continue to work with the farmer customers, being able to come alongside of them when they have policy areas that they're focusing on. For example, for the Farm Bill, if there's ways we can help them in advocating for the things that they need. It's just been a really nice experience to be able to continue working with some of those groups in this current role.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like most people, when they come to DC, they kind of have this welcome to DC moment. And especially since, like, given that you have the Midwest roots, when did you first realize that DC is not the Midwest?
Well, I think maybe even before I came to the DC area, I was trying to find a place to live in DC, and nobody would help me do that over the phone. So that's why I ended up on a friend's couch for a little while, trying to do the interviews and those types of things. In the Midwest, people are a little bit more trusting. So I likely wouldn't have had that issue if I was in the Midwest versus DC.
So out of all the mentors that you have had in your career, what would you say has been the most valuable piece of advice that you've been given?
Wow. I guess one of my mentors when I first started out, I think I mentioned Lynn Churchma, who is the policy advisor at Senator Thune's office. I think just working really hard on issues and getting to the bottom of different various problems, how are you actually going to solve it? Is the thing that you're working on, legislation or coalition building, is that really going to solve the problem if you see that through? And so that's been something that I've kind of carried with me throughout my career.
Mm-hmm. So you've been on the Hill, you've been off the Hill, you've been on an association, you've been in corporate agriculture. I'm curious, as Farm Bill discussions ramp up, and people are out there having conversations, what is, from your experience, what is one question that a lobbyist should never ask a congressional staffer?
I always, when I was on the Hill, I always kind of had in mind, who's a good lobbyist and who's a bad lobbyist, or not so good lobbyist, if that's a nicer way to put it. But I always found that people who did the best lobbying were people who found kind of that synergy between what is the kind of outside looking to do and what is the interest of that member of Congress, and where can you find alignment. And you can't force it. You certainly just need to find who might be interested in this particular subject area and how can we work together to accomplish that. And those types of things, I think, are win-win. And trying to find those can be difficult, but that's where I think you really see the magic happen.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that when you first came out to DC, you kind of had, the thought that you wanted to enter into the Foreign Service. Since being here and gaining all the experience that you have, has that dream ever resurfaced, or what pursued you to continue on the path that you have?
Really just the people, Hannah, honestly. Working in ag policy is one thing I really like is it's very bipartisan. Sometimes the conflicts are more regional based versus party line. So having that as kind of the background, the people in the area on ag policy are just top notch. And so I really enjoy working in that space. And definitely I still have the passion for international affairs and foreign policy. And I do a lot of that in my current role and in previous roles, working on some of the issues that impact our global operations, and then working with some of my counterparts in other countries and on trade issues as well. So I still have that kind of love for the foreign aspect in ag policy, and especially with global food security and those types of concerns. I really think those two go hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but over the course of your career, how would you say farm policy has changed? Like, what has been like the most significant change that you've seen?
There's been a lot of changes, I guess, in urban versus suburban districts and people coming from kind of agriculture backgrounds, less and less on some of the committees of jurisdiction, and more people from some of the urban, suburban areas on those committees. So I think there's an opportunity there for education. I mean, myself, I didn't come from an ag background, and I came to realize the importance of ag policy. And so I think kind of bringing that perspective when talking with members who might not have that ag policy background or farm experience as well, why this is so important, why it's important to have a farm bill that not only provides that safety net for farmers, but also that food security for our population in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. So we've gotten to talk a lot about your career thus far. So let's get to know Renee, outside of work. Tell me a little bit more about your family.
Well, I live in Virginia with my husband and 3 kids. So I don't raise corn or soybeans, but I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So they keep me very busy. We like to visit the area surrounding Virginia, go on kind of road trips, visit friends and family back in South Dakota as often as we can. And I still get back to the lakes in Minnesota on occasion in the summer.
Awesome. And you also have a big family back home, right? You
Yes.
come from a big family?
Yeah, I have 8 brothers and sisters, so I'm one of 9. And that was a fun kind of growing up experience. Really fortunate to have such a big family. There was always something happening. And it really taught me to be independent and kind of figure things out on my own because I had to. So that was, I think, one of the things that helped me when I moved to DC. I didn't really have political connections or anybody that I knew who was kind of helping me out. So I really had to start from zero. But having had to do that in my life so often really helped kind of prepare me for that experience.
Mm-hmm. And I also hear that your husband's a comedian. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So I'm just curious, what would you say is one of his best jokes that just gets you every time?
Well, ever since becoming a dad, he's gotten used to doing the dad jokes. So that's been a lot of fun to kind of see that, and our kids think he's pretty funny. So do I.
That's awesome. And you are also in grad school right now, is that correct?
Yes, pursuing my master's at Georgetown right now. So have been working a lot of weekends. So that's where a lot of my free time goes for now.
Mm-hmm. What made you want to pursue a higher education?
I think it's something I always had in mind, and this particular program is kind of designed for becoming a better leader. And I think, anybody can come into a leadership position. It's just whether or not you can do it well. And I wanted to make sure I was equipped to have all the tools I needed to be able to be the best leader as hopefully I move into some of those positions.
Mm-hmm. So when you're not studying and not hanging out with your family or at a comedy show, what are some hobbies that we can find you doing?
I love scuba diving. I'm an advanced open water certified scuba diver, so get to go extra deep in the dark, those types of things. So that's kind of a fun pastime. Traveling, of course, anytime I get to go out of the country or in the country to new places, that's something I love doing.
Do you have a trip on the agenda that's coming up at all, or?
For school, actually, we're going to be going to Cape Town, South Africa for our global residency next year. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Awesome. So I've enjoyed this conversation thus far. You have such a unique experience. But before we end our conversation today, we always like to end the segment with this question. But if you could go back to day one of your career, knowing everything you know now, what advice would you tell yourself?
Well, I probably have a lot of advice. One thing I think that would have really helped me out early on is talking with other people in the industry that I admired or who were experts in the agriculture policy space. You know, I mentioned I didn't really know anybody, so I was kind of trying to figure it out as I went along. And certainly I've kind of caught up in that now I know to go talk with some of the experts. But if I would have done that earlier on, I think it would have been a smoother process.
Okay. Renee, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Hannah.